All right, so before we get started, I wanted to just do a quick news announcement, some things that are going on at Volunteer West Virginia. This year, we've launched our new website on volunteerwv.gov. And our goal with our new website is to make volunteering easy for everyone in the state. So one of our goals is to have volunteer opportunities listed in all 55 counties. And I'm happy to announce that we are almost there. We've almost reached our goal. So we're looking for volunteer opportunities in 4 counties right now. So if you're from these counties or any of the counties, we would love your help. We are missing Calhoun, Grant, Mingo, and Morgan. So if we have anyone from Calhoun, Grant, Mingo, and Morgan, you would just make my day if you shared your volunteer opportunity, because then we could reach our goal of having all 55 counties by the end of this year. So it's pretty simple to do so. You just go to our website and you're going to click this big button that says Need Volunteers, and then you'll fill out a short form, and then you'll be posted on our website. And some of the benefits to you is that it's really easy. And we worked really hard to make this system as simple as it could be. So there's no registration required. You don't have to log in, remember a password. All you have to do is hop on that form, fill it out, and then post your opportunity. And it'll take less than 5 minutes. So go ahead and make a note and on your paper today to go on our website after today's webinar and post your volunteer opportunity. Oops. So I want to introduce our host today. We have a special guest. Her name's Nicki Bentley-Colthart. She's with the Grant Advantage. We love working with Nicki. She is based out of Buchanan, West Virginia. And just a little bit about Nicki, she's had over 20 years of experience with grant writing. She has a track record of receiving 70% of the grants she applies for. And over the last 20 years, she's secured over $28 million for nonprofits and higher education institutes in West Virginia. So that's really amazing. We're really lucky. You all have an expert in the room today, so you're in for a treat. And I just wanted to do a quick commercial. If you enjoyed today's training, be sure to join us for our 2-day in-person training in April. So mark that on our calendar. We haven't released the date yet, but if you'd like to attend that, go on our website after today's training and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be the first one to know. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Nicki to start today's presentation, because I know you all are really excited about grant writing.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nicki, as Dana has said. I am a grant writer. I work for the Grant Advantage. I am the owner and the grant writing consultant for the organization. And I learned how to grant write by being a social worker. I have my bachelor's degree and master's degree in social work, and I started off working in nonprofits, and I wanted to learn more about how we got paid. Really, that's where it started. It's like, how do I make sure I always have money? I know they're grant funded. How do we do that? I want to know more about it. So when I first started in the field, I asked lots of questions and I got involved and I wanted to help out. And so I kind of had more and more volunteer opportunities where I was working to learn about grant writing. Wrote my first grant, first successful grant in 1996, I think. And it was a $3,000 grant and I was so thrilled. And now it's, almost 30 years later. And we are still writing grants every day. So I like what I do. I've worked for colleges, I've worked for nonprofits, and I am here to share some of the basics of writing grants. If you come to the 2-day workshop, we'll go into this in much greater detail. We'll have opportunities to walk through each of the elements, and you would leave that workshop with kind of a white paper of all the information you would need to be able to translate that into a grant. But for today, we're just going to talk about the different topics and learn the basics so you have a place to start. Let's see here. If I can get, I need to request permission. I forgot to do that part. And then I can change the slides.
There we go, Nicki.
All right. I think I'm good. Dana, it says I'm controlling your screen now. So how do I?
Oh,
Oh,
I see it moving.
space
I
bar.
think you're in there.
See if I can go back here. There we go. Now we're in. Okay, so we're just going to talk about a little bit about the sources of grant funding, where grant dollars come from, how do they start, and then we'll talk about where you go to look for different types of funding, and then the parts of a grant proposal. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat, and I will be watching the chat on the side. But if I miss something, Dana will let me know, and we can go from there. And I just lost my screen when I opened the chat. Okay, so here we go. I've lost control again. Dana, what's going on here? There we go. All right, so what is a grant? A grant is a financial award that comes from a funding agency to help an organization carry out a specific task or project. Now, when you compare that to a grant proposal, that is what we actually write. We write the grant proposal, it's the written request, and it includes lots of different parts that helps the funder to know whether or not you're a good fit for what they want to spend their money on. I will use the term grant writing throughout this training just because that's what we say in the field. But technically, you don't write a grant, you write a grant proposal. The grant is the gift of the money. It's granted to you. So technically, that's the real definition. But I will say grant writing because I just do that. Still not letting me advance. Why is that? Okay, so funded foundations. Now we back up. Nonprofits. There we go. Have all kinds of different funding that comes in. A grant is just one funding type. So I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the different types of funding and what's out there. And I think, Dana, you're just going to have to progress it because it's not letting me do anything. Let me give up remote control and see if that works.
All right, Nikki. I'm good at this, so I got your back.
Okay, we'll just do it. Okay, I think this one has several things on the slide. Yeah, so, okay, the first is a grant. And a grant is structured in a way that the funder, the person with the funding, says, we have a mission to achieve. And we want to put out a request for proposals, RFP, or sometimes they're called notice of funding available. There's all kinds of different names, but they send out the guidelines and say, we're looking for organizations that can help us meet this goal. And then the applicant writes a grant request, grant proposal that describes how you would meet that goal. What is the scope of work you're going to do? You decide how much it's going to cost to do the different pieces and what you need to make that work. That's the basic of a grant. The next one is a cooperative agreement, and that's similar to a grant. However, the people with the money say, okay, we know what we want to do. We're looking for partners to help us carry it out, but we want to have more input into the how it's going to work. What's the scope of work? We want to have more input on negotiate that price a little bit more so we can see what we can serve more people. So sometimes you'll see campaigns such as maybe seatbelt safety or maybe like Sober Truth commercials out there. There may be a curriculum or something that people share and say, we want you to sign on and be our partner and deliver this agreement, this cooperative project with us. But as an applicant, you don't necessarily describe the scope of work. Okay. The next type of funding that nonprofits can qualify for are contracts. And this is where the person with the money, the funder, says, I want this done. This is the scope of work I want to see happen. You tell me how much it's going to cost, and then we'll see if that's the rate that I'm going to pay. So first, grants, the applicant has control of the scope of work in the budget. Cooperative agreements are jointly made, and contracts, the funder describes everything, and you just say how much it's going to cost. Like you're going to have a house built, right? You hire somebody and say, I want a house, I want 3 bedrooms, I want a game room for the kids, and I want a big porch. That's the contract description, and then they tell you how much it's going to cost. Okay, next. Other funding comes into nonprofits through gifts and donations. These are anything from fundraisers and raffles to just checks that show up in the mail one day because they like what you're doing. Or if you do an appeal for something, an annual appeal, and ask everybody to help contribute to a particular scholarship or to a particular activity. So that would be a gift or a donation. All right. And any of these types of funding that come in can be restricted. And that means you have to use the money specifically for a specific project. I equate this to grandma has sent you a card in the mail, and in the mail there's $100 in that card. But inside the card it says, last time you were here, I noticed your tennis shoes were looking kind of ratty. I want you to use this money and go buy a new pair of tennis shoes. So that's a restricted gift. Because if you use that money for something else and go back to grandma's without the tennis shoes, she's going to be upset, right? Same thing with the funder, same thing with the grant. If the agreement is that you're going to use this money to develop a training curriculum, or you're going to use this money for a playground, then that money is restricted and needs to be used for that. On the other hand, the next one is unrestricted. And that is where you can use the money for anything toward the mission of your organization. Some gifts and grants allow you to do that, and they just do general operating costs, or they'll support your mission. They just say, I love what you do. Here's $1,000. Do what you want with it. So this is like when grandma sends you a check for your birthday and says, happy birthday, have fun. Here's $100, right? So you can do whatever you want with it. You still need to thank them as you do grant people, but that's it. Okay. And then within restricted and unrestricted gifts can come in as cash. They can come in as stock. We can go ahead through the rest of these. They can come in as things that are endowed or invested. You might have a fund set up that you only spend off the interest that's made on that. So you have money for a longer period of time. That would be an endowment or an investment. And then in-kind donations are things that have the value, but it's not directly cash or an investment. It is somebody providing their time, somebody providing equipment to you, somebody, not turning in mileage when they were doing something on behalf of your organization. Those are all in-kind gifts. Now, all of these together help make up a well-rounded nonprofit organization. You don't want to always put all your eggs in one basket. Those that are most successful and are able to grow and expand they get to the point where they can have a little bit of all of this. That doesn't mean you need to be doing this by this year or next year if you're a newer or a smaller nonprofit, but the goal should be to try and diversify and have lots of different funding in there. Okay, but today we're going to focus on the grant piece. And where do grants come from? Well, there's different types of funding sources. There's public sources of grant funding, and these are our tax dollars. So they can come from our local taxes, our state taxes, federal government or federal taxes. When we send our money to the IRS, it gets sent to Congress to decide what the budget's going to be with the money that was received throughout the whole country, or for the federal government. So like right now, we hear a lot of talk about we're in a continuing resolution on our budget. We haven't had a budget decided. That's because the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. So since October 1st, we've been working off last year's budget because they haven't approved of this year's budget with our tax dollars. So it's still sitting up there being decided what's going to happen with that. Those tax dollars that Congress receives, then they have set the laws and the policies, and then the agencies of the federal government get a budget for carrying out the missions and laws and policies that they have to carry out. So that could be the Department of Education, Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Agriculture Department, all those different departments have a budget and they have a mission to carry out. Some of the activities underneath that mission, they can't do by themselves. So therefore, they offer grants to local communities, to states, to nonprofits, colleges, groups to carry out those missions for them. So that's where those grant dollars generate from. Like I said, they can come from the federal government, they can come from state departments, Local cities, counties sometimes have these public sources of funding that get distributed. So that is one source. Go to the next. On the other side is private sources of grant funding. These are dollars that don't come from tax dollars. They can come from an individual or companies that give donations. Grant making public charities, such as maybe the Rotary Club. It's probably a membership. That's a membership organization, the one below it. Grant making public charities would be the Red Cross, Cancer Society, people like that. And then there's corporate philanthropy, which are businesses that give out a certain amount of their profits to be reinvested in the communities they serve, or they just set up their own foundation. Foundations can be individuals, families, they can be company foundations, and they can also be what are called community foundations, which are set up to help individuals contribute smaller amounts of money that go to a greater good when they bring them collectively together. So those are all different types of sources of funding. So where do you look for public funding for those tax dollars we talked about? One place to search for federal grants is the grants.gov website, www.grants.gov. All federal grants are listed there. Now, if you are a brand new nonprofit or a small nonprofit and you've never had a grant before, you probably don't want to start with a federal grant. And I'll tell you why. Even though they have a lot of money, it doesn't mean you're necessarily competitive for that money yet. You might need a partner to partner with someone else who has the experience of having federal funds to work with you, and where they get the grant and then they give you a subaward of that grant to help you get where you're going. Or you have to have some kind of smaller grant and show capacity that you're able to manage money, carry out the tasks, and prove to the federal reviewers that you are competitive. And when I say competitive, you have to remember that federal grants are open to any organization in the country. So you're not just competing with those around the corner in your town. You're not competing with those, in the next county over. You are competing with all kinds of organizations across the whole country. So they're harder to get. They are larger money. And so if you've already got a few grants under your belt or you've had another federal grant, then I would start looking at grants.gov for the information. Now, a little trick, a little pro tip is before things are listed in grants.gov, they're listed in the Federal Register, which is the system where they register the guidelines and say, yep, this is going to go out and be open for everybody to apply for. So the federalregister.gov is another website you can go into and search. You can put in the categories that you're looking for, or look for a particular agency. They have email alerts that you can set up, so they'll tell you when something comes in from Housing and Urban Development. Sometimes there are comment time periods, where if it's a new funding source or a new change in the funding source, they have to publicly advertise it and give people time to make comments. That's on the Federal Register. And when I see those come out, then I know that the grants.gov is coming soon, so I can go ahead and start working on the grant with the information that I can find on the register. So if you know it's a grant that comes around once a year and you want to get a head start on it and see if there's any changes that have happened, Federal Register is a good place to start. Now, the state of West Virginia has a new site to find funding. Until the last maybe a year ago, in order to find out what money was available at the state level, you had to search agency by agency. Now, grants.wv.gov is a clearinghouse you can go in and search, and they announce grants that are coming up on that website. It's not perfect yet. The agencies are getting used to using it. Some things are forecasted that are out there, and some things are active. It's getting better, and I think it will be a really good resource. So you can use that as a source. Now, another pro tip, what I like to do is those agencies that align with my mission, whether it's a state agency or a federal agency, I follow their social media pages. So if I am working on homelessness issues, then I like to follow HUD and follow maybe Department of Labor, people that help people coming out of homelessness into housing and jobs. And then I kind of see what they're talking about, where they say, hey, this is coming up, or we've had a new rule change, or there is, we're going to start accepting grants for this program, or here's an upcoming training that's going to happen related to this grant. So I follow those social media pages. And I also will just Google, who funds playgrounds. And sometimes you can get a lead. It's not as efficient as grants.gov and the federal programs, but it does help. All right, so where do we look for private funding? Which is the next one. All right, you can search for the charity or corporation online if you know their name, or you know that in your community there's a PetSmart and you work with helping spay and neuter animals and you want to see if they have any grants. You can just Google PetSmart Foundation and see what shows up. I also will use Google and say things like playground provided by, or thanks to, a donation from, and see what press releases have been put out there from somebody else that supported a program similar to mine. That sometimes helps narrow down without having to pay money for subscription services. However, there are subscription services out there. GrantStation is one that I use a lot. It is the least expensive of the subscription services, and it is really good at finding foundations. It is, if you are a member of the West Virginia Nonprofit Association, it's included in that price. I know last week they were running a special that was $179 a year. I don't know what it is. I think that has ended, but they run specials pretty good for that. And what these services do is they go through all the 990s, or the tax forms that are filed by these foundations and private corporations that give money, and it creates a searchable database from those tax forms. So they go through and you can search by category, by type of person that the population that you're serving, the location, and they help you find funding sources. Foundation Directory Online is part of Candid's programs, and it's a really good, detailed, very visual search engine. It's a lot more expensive than GrantStation, but it's one that's sometimes available at the public library. Sometimes the libraries have subscriptions to those. Foundation Search is another one, as well as Grant Watch. They're all opportunities that are out there for a fee. If you write a lot of grants, it's worth investing in them. If you only write 1 or 2 grants a year, I would look for either a partner that has a subscription that's willing to work with you and share some information, or work through your library, or try some of the free searches. Okay, now we've talked about where to look, and you've done your search and you have found 15 grants that are very exciting, and you're ready to start writing. Well, no, you're not. Grant writing is 80% planning, 20% writing, right? So once you find these funding sources, you want to make sure that you narrow down and spend your time on the ones that are most likely to be awarded. Now, it is true, the more grants you write, the more grants you get. So there's nothing wrong with writing multiple grants for the same project or for the same categories. But you don't want to spend time chasing dollars that aren't really a good match. One mistake I commonly see with nonprofits is that they say, oh, look, there's $1 million grant over there. Let's apply for that. It's not exactly what we do, but we could probably do that. So let's go apply for that one. Well, then you're watering down your mission. And everybody on this call got into the job that they're doing because they were passionate about what they do and who they serve and how they bring relief or support or help to the community. So you don't want to water down your effectiveness by just chasing every dollar that's out there. Just because there's money for substance use disorder recovery doesn't mean that everybody should be doing substance use disorder recovery. If your organization is housing, yes, they go hand in hand, but you don't have to be everything to everybody. You want to find a grant that supports your housing, right? So you want to make sure the grant matches your needs. You want to make sure you're eligible. It's very common for you to come across, especially when you're using Google or one of the free searches, to come across a grant that sounds fantastic. It's exactly what you do. It's exactly who you serve. And then you forget to look and they only give grants in Idaho, or they only give grants out in Colorado. And if you're not located in one of those two states, you're not going to be eligible. So that's going to be a waste of your time to spend time writing that. Other eligibility might be the nonprofit has to be in business for 2 years or more. So if you're a new nonprofit, you may not be eligible for that. It could be that they want to serve organizations that only serve women or only serve men or only serve youth. So you want to make sure that you read that eligibility. And a 5-minute internet search website read can save you a lot of time. Award amounts. Most of the time, especially with tax dollars, they'll tell you how much money you can ask for. What's the maximum? And then sometimes they'll include what's the minimum. And that's to let you know what kind of scope of projects they're most interested in. So if your project is you need $500 to buy some software to use for your nonprofit, then applying for a grant that gives out $1 million is probably not going to be a good fit. Yeah, they've got a lot of money, and your first thought might be, okay, yeah, well, they have $1 million. They're going to give out $1 million. 500 will be nothing. I'm sure they'll fund it. Well, no, they want to fund projects that have an impact at $1 million level. So you're going to be competing with people presenting $1 million projects, and a project for software may not be competitive. On the other side, you may have a grant opportunity that doesn't fully fund your project, such as you need $100,000 and this one only gives out $30,000. So you have to decide, well, is it worth applying for this and looking for other money to reach the rest? Or is there a component of the project I have that I can apply for $30,000? Or is that not a good fit because I need more than that and I need to apply elsewhere? No funder is going to pay for your entire nonprofit initiatives by themselves. If they have the money to do it and the drive to do it, they're going to do it themselves instead of paying you to do something. So, grant funded projects, and where I talked about at the beginning, you have to have multiple sources of funding to come in. There's not a wonderful organization out there that's just going to pay for everything for you. So when I work with nonprofits, we talk about the fact that we're used to working on a shoestring, right? We're used to working on a very tight budget. We're used to scraping by and doing what we can with very little. But when you're grant writing, you want to think about applying for the whole shoe, not just the shoestring, maybe even the whole tracksuit that goes with the shoe, because you want to look at how you can build from where you are. So when you're talking about grant writing, you want to dream. You want to dream big and then break it down into smaller pieces to try and build the vision for your nonprofit and your community. Another way to narrow some of the prospects you have is how competitive are they? If it is a local community grant and they say they're going to give out 10 grants with the money, they anticipate awarding 10 grants, that's probably a pretty good chance in most of our communities around the state. 10, the odds of getting 1 in 10 is pretty good if, your community, if it's specialized. 1 in 10 grants in the state, it's a little more competitive. But depending on if it's an exact fit for what you do and you feel like you are absolutely in line and you can carry out that mission and do a good job, then yeah, 1 in 10 might be worth applying for at the state level. At a federal level, that is extremely competitive because not only are you competing with everybody in West Virginia and everybody in the Mid-Atlantic, you're competing with everybody across the country. And so 1 in 10 is a highly competitive grant. So then you just have to decide, are we competitive enough to take on if you're running a race, are we fast enough to beat out most of the other people and be in the top 10? Maybe we are. Maybe it is a good lineup. I've received grants that there were only 8 awarded across the country. It can be done, but you have to make sure that you're a good fit if you have to prioritize your time. Narrowing your prospects also includes looking at the reporting requirements. What does it require after you get the grants? Because getting the grant isn't the end. It's the start of the project. So once you get the grant money, then you have to carry out the program and you have to report on it and you have to make sure that everything's lined up. So if you look at what the reporting requirements are and see if that's something your organization can actually do. If you're a nonprofit and you just have one part-time person and the grant requires detailed fiscal reporting and monthly progress reports, and you have to have all kinds of surveys done, you may not be ready to do that kind of grant. If you are a school system or a college or a hospital and you have lots of people who collect data and do things like that, it might not be any big issue for you to apply for those. So you just kind of have to know your organization. The grant time period. How long is your project going to take? If you're going to build a building, it might take 2 years to get your project design, to get your bids in, to get your constructions approved, to get materials ordered, to get the construction done, and weather that could be involved, all that. So if you're applying for a project that's going to take 2 years, you don't want to apply for a grant that ends after 6 months, because you'll want to carry that money forward. So you need to be aware of what the time period is for your project and for the funding. And then also looking at the anticipated award dates. It's not uncommon for foundations to, even if they have a rolling deadline that you can apply anytime, they usually review them every quarter. So it could be 3 to 4 months before you would hear if you got that grant. So if you need something tomorrow, a grant may not be your best bet. You may go look for a donation, or you may look for a fundraiser of some kind to help you deal with that issue for tomorrow. But a grant could be anywhere from 3 months to some federal grants are up to 9 months later from the time you apply till you find out if you got it or not. So keep those in mind. And that helps you narrow down that 15 grant sources you found, narrow it down into something that's manageable. Everybody on this call is here because you are passionate about what you do and you want more money to do what you do, right? I think I see some heads nodding. And you're also busy because you're doing good work, right? So we want to think of grant writing and fundraising as another project that you take on. It's just as important as the projects you deliver so that you can continue to grow and develop, but it does take time and you have to protect your time because you have 100 other things to do. So I like to narrow your prospects down to what's really manageable and focus on those that are most likely to be good results. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Do we have any questions so far? Do I need to back up to anything? I'm not seeing.
Hey, Nikki, you had one question. Pam was curious to know, are grants different for churches than nonprofit organizations?
Oh, that's a good question. And the question answer is it depends, which you'll hear a lot from me today. It depends. Generally, churches are eligible for grants, but it has to be for the for the outreach mission of the church or for an education mission. It can't be for the preaching mission, the ministry part of the mission. It can be different types of ministry, food kitchens and music programs or outreach, but the funding sources are slightly different. There are a few foundations that will just support spreading the message of the church. Different types of churches have different types of foundations that do that. But when you start getting into public dollars, you have to separate it out a little bit more. Some funders require you to have a separate tax number or separate tax entity for the nonprofit side of things. So even though the church may be a charitable organization, you still would have to get a nonprofit status for a development arm of the church or an outreach arm. So it depends on the funding source. But yeah, there are some. It's very rare that you're going to find funding, though, that just supports the church or builds a church. Those are really, really not likely. Those are more funded with fundraisers and donations and bigger appeals to local communities to build a new building. But if your church provides a warming shelter in the winter for homeless people, then you can probably get a grant to support that part of the mission, that part of the ministry of supporting people. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Nikki. That was the only question we have so far.
Okay, great. All right, so Now you've found some funding sources and you're not really sure where you're going to go. I want to say take a step back and let's talk about the projects, the project you want to ask money for. All grants ask for the same information, just in a different order. Whether you're applying to Walmart for some, I don't know, for $2,000 to do support for your food kitchen, or if you're applying to Department of Education for $2 million to feed summer food programs. They all ask the same kind of questions. They want to know who, where, what, why, how, when, how will it be measured and what will be different, and how much will it cost now and how much will it cost to continue. And we're going to spend the next few minutes here on this, or most of this session on it. So the first one is who, and this includes several different pieces. Who is the organization that's applying for the money? Who are the key personnel or the key staff that are going to be involved in the project? And that is important because for grant funders, they want to have one contact person that they talk to. They want to have one person that is in charge of the program so that they know someone is following up. Because it's very easy for groups to say, oh, well, all three of us are equally important, so we're all going to be the lead. But then this person thinks that person's doing it, and this person is waiting on those two to make a decision, and things slow down. So even though you can have co-directors, you have to have one that's a point person for every grant project. So, and when you do that, you want to have a resume for them or a bio of some sort so that you can communicate to the funder a little bit about that person and why they were chosen to be the lead. And that can include their education, that can include their experience, that can include life experience that makes them qualified for this position, any of those circumstances. And go back just a second. Yeah, and then the partners. It's more common nowadays that you have multiple partners on a grant because, again, your organization doesn't have to be everything to everybody. It's stronger if you stick to your mission and you bring in partners to carry out their mission, and then you serve the whole person and the whole community. All right, so partners are part of the who, and then as well as the target population served. Who's being served? Are you working with low-income individuals? Are you working with LGBTQ youth? Are you working with pets? Are you working with patients from a hospital or students at a college? Those kind of things. So in order to be ready for the grant, you have to be able to answer all these questions on the who. Who's the organization? Who's going to be in charge? And what is their experiences? Who are your partners? And who are you going to serve? All right, next one. The other part that goes along with that is where. Where is the location of the organization and the services that you're providing? They may be the same town, they may not. You may have a statewide organization and you're located in Charleston, but your program, this particular program is going to take place in Fairmont. You might have different locations that you need to describe. And what's a little bit of description of that area? Is it part of Appalachia? Is it rural? Is it suburban? Is it have a high population of African Americans living there? Does it have a high unemployment rate? What's a little bit about where it is and some of those demographics that explain it. I was on a grant review committee for Department of Health and Human Services in DC. And we were given 20 grants, and then we were told to go back to our hotel room and read them and come back in the morning, and we will have your committee look at them and we'll prioritize which ones are going to move on to the next round for funding. And when I was in that meeting, there was an application that had come from a rural community somewhere, I can't remember where, and one of the reviewers was angry about this application. She immediately said, this one I'm throwing out. This one is just full of crap. They don't even know what they're talking about. And it was one that I really liked. So I was like, okay, explain to me why it's so, what did I miss? I'm not understanding. And she said, this proposal keeps talking about poverty rates, but they're in a rural community. There's no poverty in rural America. In her mind, poverty only happened in urban centers of cities. That's where maybe she had seen poverty or she perceived poverty to be. She was not understanding of rural poverty. I think she was from New York, if I remember correctly. And so, the other reviewers had to educate her a little bit, but had the proposal itself used census data and actual, information demographics to show what's going on in that community, she wouldn't have had any reason to argue that. And it would have made the proposal move faster. So make sure that you are aware that the person reading the proposal doesn't know you, doesn't know your organization, well, in most cases, doesn't know the population you serve in your community. It's your job to explain that to them in the who and the where. Okay. So the purpose of a grant proposal is to make the reviewer understand what you're doing and want to invest and get excited about what your project is. Okay, next slide. So when you're looking for in the grant proposals, like I said, they'll ask for this information in different ways. But as long as you can answer the who and the where, you should be prepared to answer sections that might be called an introduction or organizational information. You could be able to answer things about the agency background. Sometimes they'll have a section that's target population, key personnel or staff, or maybe management team, and partnerships and collaborations. So when you look at grant guidelines and they have all these different categories and they have all these different titles, and when you look at them at first, you're like, I have no idea what they want. You can refer back to this and say, okay, oh, they want to know the who, they want to know the where. So these are some of the tips that just kind of help you. If you can answer the who and the where, you're ready to answer most of these questions for this section. All right, let's go to the next one. The next part is, okay, wait a second. Let's see, do we have any recommendations for a women-owned business when looking for grants? And do we have leftover money at the end of the year that people were looking to give out? All right, so in order to access leftover money, which the end of the year is not necessarily December. Every organization has their own fiscal year. So sometimes it's a year that ends in March or ends in October or June. But some funders do have excess money that needs to be spent. And the way you access that is to be in partnership with them already. They're going to reach out to you as someone who's already got a grant from them and already done a good job and say, yep, we have a little bit extra. Could you use another $5,000 toward this project? And you can say, yes, please send me a check. And then they'll send you an award. That's how you access that leftover money piece. For-profits are eligible for some grants, but you have to go back and look at that eligibility. Again, if you are searching through grants.gov or the state website or through one of the subscription services, you can filter on the side by who's eligible. You can say for-profits are eligible or there's no requirements. You can click those buttons and then it'll narrow down the search for you. There are fewer grants available for for-profit organizations. I know as myself, when I took over Grant Advantage and started this and I needed to get a small business loan to get things kicked off, there weren't any grants out there to help me do that either. So it's not as, the cost of doing business is the cost of doing business, and there's not always grants. Now, if you're doing something that is a priority for the federal government or a priority for the state or another corporate entity, then sometimes there are grants available. So I would look at Small Business Administration. I would look at, talk to the SBDC in your area and see what they know about, because they might know some more about the local funding opportunities. Okay, hope that answers that question. Let's see. I wanted to quote certain data in regards to the type of population I want to see. I want to serve. Would it be acceptable to reference personal survey? Yes. We will talk a little bit more into that when we get into the how we're going to measure and how we're going to do it, but and the needs section. So we'll get into that in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and continue here on what. So what is important? What is going to describe the purpose of your project? It's brief. It's a description of what you want to accomplish. And the number one trick I can give you for writing a grant is that you need to focus on the solution and not the problem. You want to focus on the solution to the problem. people want to be part of the solution. Funders want to be part of the solution. Everybody has problems. We all can go in and say where we have shortcomings in our budget. I could guess probably around the room, it's staffing, making sure we have enough money to pay staff, that we have enough equipment, and then we have enough facilities, right? I think everybody on this call could always use more money for those three things. So going to a funder and saying, I'm going to have to lay people off if I don't get more money, they're going to go, so is everybody else. Why should I invest in you? Right? But if you go in and say, we're going to deliver educational training to help high school students receive some community college credits before they graduate high school. And in order to do that, I need a person, right? That's the solution, is we're going to provide these students these credentials. And that's the solution to the program. Okay, we'll get into that. So the what is your elevator speech. This is, if anybody's familiar with that term, if you got in an elevator on the 5th floor with someone who had cash that was ready to hand it out, and you got to the basement to tell them what your story was, this is what your what should be. It should be short, succinct, descriptive, and this is what we're going to do with the funding. We're going to, and again, focus on the solution. We're going to end homelessness in our community, or in youth homelessness, maybe. Or we're going to improve reading levels of 3rd graders from 60% to 75% of students being on reading level. You know, what's going to happen? What are you going to do? It's not how you're going to do it. We'll talk about how you're going to do it later. But what are you going to do? What's the big picture here? What's our solution? Okay, next. And the what shows up in grant proposals under categories such as the purpose, very simple, a brief project description, and sometimes the funders just want a sentence describing the program. So you need to be able to take all your ideas of what you want to do and bring it down into a short, succinct description. Now, another pro tip, when you're writing a grant, you don't write a grant for your whole organization and everything your organization does. You're asking this grant to support one piece of what you do, whether that is paying for part of a training program, an outreach program, paying for training for staff, paying for whatever it is. You want to narrow it down to what this funder is going to be responsible for, and not muddy it with a whole bunch of other pieces about what you do, because then it confuses the reader and says, well, what am I paying for? What is it that I'm actually, does this line up with what we give money to? Because they talk about so many different things. So yeah, you can say, as the organization, we are a recovery home for women in recovery from substance use disorder. Okay, that's who you are. But what we're going to do with this grant is develop a job training component as part of our housing. And so this is to help people get jobs. So that's the one piece. Now, we all know that in that home, you're also doing peer support, you're also doing counseling, you're also providing transportation, you're doing family reunification services, you're doing a lot of other stuff, but that doesn't belong in this grant. This grant just wants to know about the job training that you're going to do. And that's hard for us because we see everything that we do as all pieces of the same wheel. We have to do it all. But for this funding, you're just asking for a piece of the pie funding to pay for a little piece of it. Does that make sense? That's hard to remember when you're writing, but that's something that we can do. Okay, so next. Why? This is where you're allowed to talk about the problems. In the why section. This is the only place I would talk about the problems. The problem or the issue that you're going to look at, and the statistics. And someone asked in the questions, can you use personal surveys or information that you've gathered through your organization? Yes. You can use case examples from case studies of people you've worked with. I would change their names to protect their privacy. You can use, or sometimes you could take 2 clients that had similar paths and merge them together to make an example of what the organization could do. I wouldn't make it up. I would make it based on something that's actually happened. And agency data, if you collect information on how many people have gotten a job, or how many people have been housed, or how many people have improved their parenting skills, or how many animals have been rehoused, after fostering, those kind of things. Those numbers are important data. Under why, you want to talk about the gaps in services. If you're getting ready to fill in something that others aren't doing, as long as it's within your mission, then here's where you lean into it and you say, okay, this is a problem we have, right? And then the impacts on the clients and the community. Is there something out there that's going on in your community that is impacting lots of people? Plant is broken down, so we have a lot of unemployed people right now who need X, Y, and Z. You've had a natural disaster and people need food and clothing. Why? Why are you asking for money now? Why is now the time to ask for the money, and why? Another thing, especially if you're applying for public monies for tax dollars, you want to have some kind of research study that shows that this is really a problem. What's out there? What else, what other resources have shown that this is a problem? Lower graduation rates or lower reading levels impact later lifetime earnings. There's research that shows these things. So that's why you want to work with these kids now to prevent problems in the future, kind of thing. Okay, next. So here are just, and I believe you will get a copy of this recording so you can pause on this and get, see these links here. Here's a few of the sample data sources that I use a lot to find information for proposals. The National Center for Education Statistics has a lot of information on the enrollment of schools in a particular county or city. They have information on low income levels, on race, on, there's all kinds of stuff is there on kids. So if you're working with kids, I use this. If you're working in education, you can look at graduation rates and retention rates and things like that through there. The census now has a wonderfully easy to use website for quick facts. It's just data.census.gov or data.census.gov, however you properly say that word. I always say data because I don't know if that's the right way or not. But and you can go in there and just search for poverty rate, Upshur County, and it will give you a number. And then on the side, there's a quick fact sheet. You can click on it and it'll tell you all kinds of information from the census data that it's pulled out about that county. So it's getting much easier to use. There's charts and graphs on there that you can literally copy and download to put in your grant. And it is very helpful to use that one. West Virginia Board of Education has a Zoom. It's called West Virginia Zoom. It's not like this portal or this surface we're using right now, but it's just the name of their data board. And you can find out by school or by county more information on the students enrolled there, what their educational attainments going, how their testing is doing, and you can make a case for the need for enhanced programs for certain things. The West Virginia Office of Drug Control Policy has a dashboard that shows the number of overdose suspected interactions with either the ER or EMS services in each county. And you can look at drug-related overdoses over the last so many years. It's got lots of little trigger buttons. You can click and unclick things to get more data to make your case of what the problem is in your community. West Virginia Kids Count has a data book that they put out every year that talks about well-being of children in West Virginia, and they have lots of information there. Bureau of Labor Statistics can tell you information about unemployment rates, job trends. You can look at forecasted jobs if you're doing job training to look at that. And the Department of Justice has lots of information on arrests and recidivism and all kinds of stuff like that is helpful if you're working on a program that's a second chance or working on a program with youth. They have some juvenile justice information. So those are all really good resources to help you make the case for the need of why we're doing this. Also, when you're writing grants, it's okay to acknowledge your own shortcomings, right? Everywhere else in your nonprofit, you would not tell somebody, our people aren't trained. Right? You wouldn't say that to anybody else. But in a grant, you can say, our staff have not had enough training and we want to strengthen our capacity to do whatever. So this is our need, is to help them get exposure to more best practices and evidence base. You're not going to tell that to anybody else in the world, but in a grant, you can say our people need training. Okay, next. So the needs section shows, oh no, here's some more of the research tools that you can use. There are journals and databases in libraries that you can get onto and look for research that's out there that might say you could look up. Again, when you're searching, either for funding sources or for research, look for the solution. Don't look for the problem. And you're going to want to go through and you can look at, let's see, go back a couple, there we go. We type in impact of, back in the 80s, there were lots of studies on the impact of single parenthood or the impacts of not having access to a local community grocery store, those kind of things. Other places you can find free research tools are Google Scholar and Microsoft Academic. They are just search engines. You go in and you type and you put in what you're looking for, and it gives you a list of articles that includes research about that. However, since they're free, sometimes they send you to pages where you'd have to pay to get a copy of that article. But sometimes you can see enough of the abstract to know if that's something you would use or not, or enough information to cite what you're trying to say just in the abstract. So those are good resources to look through. And science.gov is another one. AI is still developing, artificial intelligence and all the AI applications that are out there. I do think at some point with the new Google and Bing that they'll be able to do some of that research and pull things together for you. Right now, they can't. If you go to Chat GPT and you say, find me an article related to the impact of homelessness, it'll say, I'm sorry, I can't do that because all of my data was entered before such and such a date, and you could use one of these sources, and then they send you to the same place that Google would send you. So they're not there yet. I think eventually they'll be able to do more searching, and some of the libraries and journals will tie into it and give them more information, but right now they can't do that. But it's still a possibility down the road. All right, so
Nicki,
where do you put the why in a grant proposal? Let's hit the next slide.
Nicki, you had an interesting thought in the chat box. It
Oh,
was,
okay.
do you want to check it out? It's the
No, go
last.
ahead if you can read it.
Oh yeah, I don't know what this is. Could EBSCO, EBSCO host be helpful? Do they have access to that at libraries?
Yes, a lot of colleges have that and some libraries have it. And sometimes you can access that through the library's website. It's like, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically access to journals for different education purposes, I think is where it started. Yes, so that is a resource that you can use to find more journal articles. Now, how much time do you spend on looking up journal articles? It depends on your project. If you're doing something completely new and you're approaching a funder that this is something they're really interested in and they're going to know a lot about it, I would have a few journal citations in there. I would do two or three or four probably to make sure that they know that I knew what I was talking about. If you're applying to the local bank for $400 to do something, they're not going to want a bunch of journal articles to read. They're just going to want to know the information from your agency. So it depends on where you're going. A stronger proposal for competitive public funds, I use a lot more journal articles than I do for smaller groups, smaller grants. Okay, next. So where do you put the why in your grant proposal? It's in the sections that are either called problem statement, a need statement. Need is a very common one that you see, or the issues or challenges of your community. Yeah, the EBSCO it does look like it is pretty standard at colleges. So it just depends on if you have access to that college library. Some will allow you to come in, some colleges will allow you to come in and use it. Some you have to get permission to have access. I guess it depends on if they're a private or a public college. And there are other rules. So I'll just put that in the chat. Okay. So yeah, these sections are common. Sometimes it's all in one place and it'll say, tell us the need of your agency and then tell us the issues and challenges related to it. Other times they'll ask about the need and then they'll ask about the who, and then they'll go back and ask about the issues. So again, if you can answer why, why this program is needed, what are the gaps in services, what kind of evidence do you have to show that this is a need, you'll be able to answer any of those questions regardless of how they show up in the proposal. Okay. Before we get into how, does anybody else have questions? This is a good point to take a couple more questions. Just look and see here. Okay. I think we'll go ahead then. All right, how? The how section of your grant is where you get to talk about the stuff you want, right? The stuff you want is not the solution you're going to create. The stuff you want, or the reason you decided you needed a grant in the first place, is the how section of a grant. While we think that this is what the whole proposal should be about, grant funders want to see this in this section alone. They want to know, what are some of the action steps you're going to take? What are the partners' roles and responsibilities? What is the evidence that this plan should work? Again, back to those journal articles. Is there any reasonable reason to think that providing kids meals after school will help improve their nutrition levels? You know, are there any research out there that says that? This is where you get your reader excited about the day-to-day, what's going to happen, and you really paint that picture of those solutions that you're proposing, the things that you need to make those solutions happen. And this is where you're going to be descriptive. This is the place where you spend most of your time when you're writing a grant. Now, when I'm writing a grant, I start here. Even though the other questions may come up first in the guidelines, I go down through until I find the how stuff, and I start writing on that. And then I start thinking about how much it's going to cost me. So I kind of work on a budget while I'm working on the how. And then I go back and fill in the other pieces and then make sure everything matches up and lines up and adjusts as we go through. So how is very, very important. And again, you want to be descriptive. You want to paint a picture for those that don't know anything about your organization. They don't know anything about your community. They don't know anything about what you do. Most of the time, the reviewers are going to be from the same field you're in, and they kind of know what you're talking about. But you don't want to use a lot of acronyms or alphabet soup in your proposal. If you write CDC, to some people, that means the health organization. To some people, that means a community development corporation. To other people, that means a child development center. So you could either be talking about childcare, you could be talking about community development, or you could be talking about health just by using those letters CDC. So spell out what it is that you're talking about as much as possible. And don't make the reader guess what that means, because it can completely change the outcome of a grant if the reader is confused. So be descriptive, be specific, and lay out those action steps. And the action steps can include anything from, I need to hire staff, or I need to develop a training module to teach. I need to purchase a training module. I need to, buy food for camp. I need to, whatever the action steps are that you're going to do. That's what goes in here. All right, next. This section may be called scope of work. It may be called an action plan. It may be the methods that are going to be used. Sometimes it's called the implementation plan. And sometimes in a grant, they'll ask for all of these, and you just have to kind of slightly define things a little bit differently in each one to answer the questions. Now, when I say these sections may be called scope of work, usually under the scope of work, it'll have specific questions. Describe how participants will be recruited, or describe how staff will obtain training. Is it online? Is it face-to-face? Those kind of things. They'll ask specific questions, but as long as you can understand how you want it to happen, you'll be able to address these. Okay. All right. And when goes along with the how. Funders want to know when the money's going to be spent and when they can expect to see those solutions take place. These are timelines of activities and who's responsible for each one. That's a common question that happens under when. They sneak in a little bit more of that who and the partnership roles. So sometimes you'll see in the timeline, they want to know the action that's going to take place, when it's going to take place, and who's going to do it to see if your management plan is enough to handle it. I recommend breaking down your timeline into months or quarters, depending on how long your project is. If it's a 5-year grant, I do quarters. If it's a 1-year grant, I do months. If you are a college or a school district, you might do things in semester, like you might say this will happen in fall semester, spring semester, and over the summer. But I would not do your timeline as in 2024 we'll do this, 2025 we'll do that. That's too much vague description for a funder. They want to know, if I'm implementing with you now, is it going to start making a change during the next time period? Or am I better to have you wait a year and come back and I'll give the money to somebody else for this year and then we'll give you money next year? So it just depends on, they want to know that. They want to know that you've thought through the realisticness of doing a program. You know, if you say in the grant you're going to hire 6 people to be community outreach workers, and then also in your timeline, you say that in month 1, we're going to deliver 20 workshops. Well, you haven't hired people yet, so how are you going to do that in month 1? In most communities, it takes at least 6 weeks to get somebody hired, right? You advertise and you get people to turn in their resumes, you look over the resumes, you go through, you decide who you want to interview, you interview them, well, their schedule doesn't work, so you got to get another date, and it takes some time. So it's okay to put that in your timeline. If you want to put up front that I've got a 6-week window or a 2-week, depending on the position, if you're looking for a highly specialized, you're trying to hire an epidemiologist to do research on the prevalence of different types of diseases, it might take a while to find one, especially if your program's located in Lewis County or Lincoln County or somewhere that doesn't necessarily have a college program that can help that. So you want to make sure that you give yourself time and be realistic and allow that time for planning. There's also grants out there that are just for planning. People avoid those because the implementation grants are larger, but the planning grants are great because they will pay for time for you to do the research you need, to do surveys of the people you're going to serve, to make sure that the programs are actually going to meet the needs and not just what you think in your head as you're sitting in your office one day. It gives you time to maybe visit another program that is doing what you want to do, and you can learn from them. So planning grants are wonderful things if you can find those. They're great. Okay, so when? The when section, surprisingly, is usually called timeline or time frame or schedule. It's pretty straightforward. And that's usually just in one place. I tend to do my timelines one of 2 ways. I will either do a narrative with bullets and say, month 1, this will happen. Month 2, this will happen. Or I do like a little spreadsheet and I put all the activities down one side, and then I put the months across the top, and then I put little X's of when things are going to happen, because some things overlap and some things run for a long time and some things are just happening every once in a while. And then the reviewer can see what you're talking about. If you're applying through a grant portal for a foundation and it's just they don't give you much room, I would just do the bullets. I wouldn't do the graphic because it gets messed up once they print those out. But there's some suggestions in there. But knowing when things are going to happen is important. That goes in line with your how. How are you going to do it, when it's going to happen? Okay, next one. All right, so now that we have defined who we are, who we're going to serve, who we're going to partner with, we've talked about when we're going to do, where we're going to do these things. We've talked about how we're going to do them, why we're going to do them, and when we're going to do them. Then we need to go back to that solution and we need to talk about what is going to be different because we did these things. And how do we know that it's different? So this is your evaluation or your measurement. And there's some very common terms that get used for the evaluation piece. Now, I've been running grants for 30 years, and I can tell you every time I sit down with someone and say, let's talk about evaluation, everybody goes, I don't know. It's common because we have to think about it. But we often overthink it. because we learned in science class that to do research, you have to have a control group and a group that gets the service, and then you have to compare. We don't have to do that much. In some projects, that might be exactly what you have, and you can do that. Most of us, no, that's not how we do it. But we do need to define what our goals are. So what are the goals? What's that overall solution we want to have? We want to end homelessness. We want to reduce the pet population. We want to improve outcomes, educational outcomes for youth. We want to reduce domestic violence, or we want to help women get back on their feet after they've been a victim of domestic violence. Any of those things. Those are our goals. That's the big lofty, this is what we want to do. The objectives are the things that it takes to meet those goals, right? So we want to, and these are should be measurable. So you want to talk about the, I think I may have a slide next that talks about SMART goals. If not, I'll come back to that in a minute. The objectives, yep, I do. Let's go ahead and go hit that Smarties. So objectives should be specific. They measure what you're going to, what is the goal that you're trying to reach. And underneath the objectives, there's smaller goals, such as, 15 people will go into a temporary housing shelter during the next 12 months, right? So that's a specific number of people and specifically what they're going to do. Measurable is how many, how much, how often. Is it attainable? Is it something that's reasonable and achievable? So yeah, 15, that's probably reasonable in a year. That's less than 2 a month. And, is that achievable based on the resources in your community? Yeah, probably. Relevant. Is it relevant to your vision? Does the objective relate back to the need you talked about? Does it relate back to the problem? Did it relate back to the how you're going to do things? Is it relevant? Time-based, they want to see some kind of time frame. So like I said in the first example, within the next year, these people will do that. We'll go into temporary housing, and then within the next 18 months, we will have 12 of those families sign a lease into a permanent rental situation. And then another 8 of those will receive a HUD voucher, so therefore they're able to maintain their housing longer. So those might be the 3 objectives for a homeless program. Now, we've heard about SMART objectives for years. Now they have made them SMART T. So they've added 2 more categories that we need to think about when we're talking about objectives. One is it inclusive? How do you include underrepresented voices and share the power of this program and the outcome? So that can be, if it's a program that's working with low income individuals, how do you know this is what they need and not just what you think? If you're working with a population that's a minority race or gender issues or something like that, how do you know that they are included in the plan and the process? That's where you want to talk about that in the objectives. You want to, include surveys or include a focus group or talk to prior clients who have been successful and what worked and what didn't work. And that helps you to define your objectives based on other real world information. And is it equitable? That's the E. How are you going to remove any kind of barriers or challenges to either participating in this program or achieving the goals? So, for instance, is there a barrier of a landlord that won't accept unmarried couples living there? Or they don't want someone who has a criminal background to live in their housing? Is there something that your organization is going to do to mitigate those issues? Are you going to work with a team of landlords and say, hey, we're going to stand here and we'll take responsibility to a point for a person, and we're going to be in there working with them, helping them out. Can you just take a chance and help us, give this person a chance? Or are there other areas that are low income individuals can't participate because there's a cost? Well, does this objective provide some way to pay for that cost for them so that they can participate in the program fully? If there's challenges with transportation, what are your solutions to that? Do you give out bus vouchers? Do you provide transportation through case management? Do you have a series of volunteers that help? Or are you taking the program to where the people are so that transportation isn't an issue? Those are all equitable and inclusive things that you can do in your programming. We look at these and we think this has to be very complicated. We have to do really complicated things, but no, you don't. You can do a simple survey before you offer an education program and after, and say, what is your perception about the number of cats running loose in the neighborhood? And then you do a program about educating people on how to take care of cats or how to connect people. And then at the end of the survey, do you still think runaway cats are a problem in our community? Do you feel like you have the information you need to make the next step? You can just do something simple like that. You can just ask people for a copy of their lease. If that's one of the objectives, is that they get a lease, you have a copy of the lease, then you've met the objective. You can keep spreadsheets. There are lots of different types of databases out there. And if your organization has the finances to do that, they're great. You can track a lot of stuff, but you don't have to. If you can, as long as you can track it somewhere that's consistent and it gets filled in every day when something happens, then you have good solid data that you can use. So it's all good. Okay, let's go back to the lingo, the slide before. So the goals we talked about and the objectives are some of those other things that we're going to measure. And then we're going to talk about the methods or activities or outputs. One of the common things I see is a confusion by people writing grants between outputs and outcomes, right? And I break it down into one simple thing. You just take the sounds and reverse them. So outputs are what you or the client put out. You put out a training and they put out attendance. They show up. That's what their action's going to be. You're going to do this and they're going to do that. And that is one of the activities or the outputs that happen in the program. So when you're measuring that, that's how many people, how many workshops did you offer? How many people attended? How many rides did you give in your transportation program? How many meals did you serve? Those are your outputs, right? How many people attended? How many, and in some circumstances, it could be how many certificates were earned for participation or for completing this education. And then the outcomes or the impacts are what comes out because you did all those other things, right? So what comes out of a program that provides meals is people were fed and people had nutrition. People aren't hungry. Those are your outcomes, reduction of hunger. Your other impacts might be somebody got a job or somebody obtained a degree and it led to further education or a job. Somebody has maintained their housing. They are no longer homeless. Those are your outcomes, right? And impacts. Then a lot of times we want to talk about how do we know that things are different? We've talked about goals, objectives, methods. These are the things that we're going to check. But what are the indicators that truly show that that change has happened? Those indicators of impacts are, or performance indicators, are sometimes called, are things that show that the change has occurred. So for the program itself, we needed to hire staff, we've hired staff. That's the performance indicator. Staff's on board, they're trained, they're working. We needed to reduce the number of missed doctor's appointments by providing transportation. So how many doctor's appointments did we take clients to and how many doctor appointments were kept? You know, we can keep track of that. You can track the number of clients that were satisfied with the services they received, or that they have been more engaged with the program, or that they got jobs. So whatever that indicator is that you measure it, I always try and think of what is my indicator going to be as I'm defining all of these, as I'm defining what my goals, objectives, and methods are. How am I going to know? How am I going to know? So you keep track with that. There are dozens of resources online about how to measure an impact. So I will sometimes just type in, how do I know that someone's self-esteem has increased? There's resources out there. There's free resources out there. Some of them are surveys that you can give them. They're already written for you. You just say, I'm going to use this model. Others are, here's behaviors you can observe. And that would be something that maybe a case manager would note and write down, or a teacher could say, yeah, we have seen improved behavior as a result of being in this program, that kind of thing. All right, so let's talk about questions on measuring. Does anybody have a project idea that they have no idea how you would measure? Let's see here. Would you recommend including beneficiaries in defining those indicators in your process? For example, asking them how they might define success. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what we as a professional fall into the trap of, we know what the books say. We know what our experience has been so far, but we don't know the experience of those we're working with. We don't know what's changed in their lives and other things. So when you work with individuals, a lot of times you'll develop individualized goals, right? So for this person, they may feel that in order for their life to be better, one of their goals is I need to reconnect with my mom. I really want to have a relationship with my mom. I need to touch base with her. That's a goal. That's a realistic goal that's in there. Now there are factors that they can't control. There may be something with the mother that they cannot communicate with them, and you're talking about two people. But you could have a goal of that. You could have another goal of I want to go back and get my GED. That's a goal. And so what I do when we have individualized goal plans in my overall grant evaluation, I will put something in there such as 50% of clients will achieve at least 1 to 3 goals in year 1 on their individualized plan. And then I'll usually give examples. This could be a goal such as A, B, and C. Or I will include of those pursuing housing as a goal, this percentage will achieve that by such and such a date. Because we're dealing with humans and people are different and they have different needs and obstacles in their life. So, okay, good. Anybody else have a program that you work on that you're not quite sure how to measure something and you want some ideas? How do you know your program's making a difference? How do you track it? Or does somebody have a really unique, I know really unique, you guys can't be really unique, a unique program that does something out there that you want to share, how you figured out how to measure it that might help somebody else?
Nikki, you had one from Randy. He said the impact of his website redesign.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you could measure, I don't know if the question is how to measure that. I'm going to answer that one. And then if he had other points on how he's measuring it, we'll add that in. Yeah, the impact of your website redesign. So if you have some data before of how many visits you had to your website before, and then maybe how many of those visits translated into engagement with the agency, whether that's through questions about what services are offered or enrollments into programs, or if you kind of have an idea of what those numbers were, then you redesign the website, and then you can track how many visits to the website there were. Sometimes the website systems will tell you how long people were on the website and did they move from multiple screens. Some of the resources out there will track all that for you. And then that shows you the impact for engagement with the organization. You're not going to be able to move the needle and show that website helped create the long-term impacts, but it got people engaged with the organization, or it improved information sharing, something like that. Maybe you can track the number of increased emails you received or phone calls that said, we found this on the website, that kind of thing. Does that help?
Let's see, Nikki, you had one other thought. This is a cool thought. I'm not sure if this is a question or asking for advice, but Tanya asked, she's not sure if there's any measurable data about the amount of people refusing substance abuse use treatment due to lack of care for their pets. She was curious if she would base that information off surveys she would conduct in the community, or if you have any other recommendations.
Yeah, I would think that I would probably start with contacting some of the recovery homes and the treatment programs around the state and see if they have any case examples or like a survey of providers and see how um, frequently they see that. So to see if it's a common occurrence. And maybe also check with the shelters to see if they have an influx of people who are turning in animals because they're going into treatment. That's a problem I've never thought about before. So, but those would be where I would start. I talk to the providers who are working with people, and see if it's a common issue that they're seeing, or also just surveying people in the community, clients that you're serving, and see if that's a barrier. Because I do think that's one of those that's going to be a case example. Now, there may be a research study out there that somebody did in another state somewhere. There may be research out there. I'm just not, I've never looked at that before. So yeah, it's possible to find that. Ah, someone else said they've encountered it several times. Great. So there's people posting it in the chat now. You might want to send them a private message and share your email, and they might be able to share some stories with you too, of that you could use for case examples to help make that case. Yep, there's some other people. Yeah, so please look through the comments and make some connections while we're here, because I think people have some resources you could use. That's good. Okay. All right, let's move on to do we have another question? St. Joe's Parkersburg. Ah. It says there's a recovery center in Parkersburg that will accept emotional support animals. So that's good to know. Somebody is starting to address that. I know in the homeless communities, when we're moving people into a hotel, that some hotels will accept service animals and not emotional support, and others will accept both. Sometimes they have to have additional fees paid for that temporary housing in the hotel for pets, and not all agencies will pay for that. So you're often looking for donations to cover that. So yeah, that's good. Okay, it looks like this is a common problem. So I think if you reach out to people in the chat, you'll get some good leads on where some information is. Thank you guys. That's great. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Sorry, Nikki. You're responding to a message. All right, there you go.
That's all right. Okay. We did Smarty Objective. I'm gonna skip on to that. Okay. The sections of what will be different and how will we know are either called your goals and objectives, your impact statements, your evaluation plan. And sometimes they ask for what's called a logic model. And a logic model, all that means is it's a spreadsheet that says, or a table that says, what's the problem? What resources are we going to put toward it? How are we going to do it? And how are we going to measure it? That's it. They make it into a picture type table instead of a narrative. So you'll explain it in your narrative, and then sometimes they want to see your logic model, just so it's all on one page or 2 pages that explains it. So don't get freaked out about the logic model. Just answer the questions at the top. And if you can answer what's going to be different, how we're going to measure it, when we're going to measure it, if you can go through those Smarty plans and come up with those, you'll be able to answer any logic model that's out there. Okay. Now we're going to talk about budget. This is the other category when I talk to clients, and I worked on college campuses for about 20 years, and this is the question that faculty would just gloss over when we talked about it. They're like, I know what I want to do. I'm passionate about it. I have no idea how much it's going to cost. So that's okay. We all start there. Your budget is your best estimate of what it's going to cost based on your prices today and based on the information you have right now. So you want to include all costs that are associated with this part of the project that you're asking for in this grant, right? You want to relate all the costs back to the how you're going to do things section. Funders get upset when they are reviewing a budget and all of a sudden there's money in the budget for a vehicle, but they've never mentioned using a vehicle anywhere in the grant. Or there's money for going to a training in the budget, but there's no money, it's not mentioned anywhere in the grant. So make sure that in the how section, you lay out everything you're going to ask money for, all the things and the stuff. You want to base your budget on real costs. There's nothing worse. Well, I mean, there's bad things, but it's bad when you get a grant and you don't have enough money to carry out what you wanted to do because you guessed at the numbers and they were nowhere near right. So actually take the time and that 80% of planning and 20% writing to look up what it really costs to have a vehicle that you need, or to look back and see how much you've paid for office supplies in the last few months, and see if that's something that you want to put into this grant because you're expanding the program and you're going to need more copier or printer cartridges, and you're going to need more paper and things like that. So look at what you base it on real costs. If you don't know what it's going to cost, Google it. We look for, I go to Amazon a lot and just get 3 or 4 prices and come up with a ballpark of what it's going to cost. If you have an item that is over $5,000, then I would look for an actual quote from a company that sells that item and see what kind of rates they would give you and use that for your budget. And you want to check your math. You want to make sure your math is right. And just there will always be someone on the review panel who likes numbers, and they will go through your budget line by line by line, and they will catch any mistakes that you've made in the math, and you'll lose points there. So yeah, I didn't say this in the beginning. In order to be competitive for a grant, you want to get as many points as you can. Just like when you're writing a term paper for school or some kind of a report, they give you a category and questions and how many points that's worth. And then you go to the next category and questions and how many points that's worth. So you want to earn as many points as you can. So by skipping things or ignoring sections or saying, I don't know the answer, so I'm not going to answer it, that's when you lose points. So you want to make sure that you can answer all of these when you go into the grant, because that's what makes you competitive. All right. So also sometimes grants require what's called matching funds. And if they do, there'll be descriptions in the guidelines. And matching funds are other money besides what's in this grant that's going to help pay for this project. Not pay for everything else that your organization does, but what's going to contribute toward this particular piece of the project. So if you have, you're asking for money to buy a van, let's go back to that example, and you're asking for them to contribute $10,000 because you already have money donated of $20,000 and you think you can get what you want. I don't know how much a van costs today, 50,000. So maybe 30 is not enough. I don't know. Maybe it's a used van. Anyway, you can get, you could say, I have $20,000 matching funds for this van from these sources. Now, not all grants require that. You don't have to worry about it. But in your planning, if you look at where some of your resources are coming from, if you're going to hire staff, if you're going to ask one of your staff members to take on this new project and they're going to spend half their time on it, well, maybe the other half of their salary, you can ask for half their salary on this grant and the other half is paid for by another source. And that's okay. You can do that. So those are options. Don't worry about matching unless you have to. Don't include it unless they ask for it, because once you match $1, you can't use it again on another grant. You can only match them once. That's why it's called a match. You can provide leveraging. These are grant details that we go into in the larger workshop. You can leverage things that exist, but you can't match something more than once. So, okay. What can you include in your budget? I think that's the next slide. Maybe.
And Nicki, you might get into this question on the next slide too, but Erin was curious to know if you could include salaries in your budget. Oh, it just popped up.
It is. Yes, you can. In most grants, they will allow some sort of salary unless the grant guidelines say no. Now, there are some foundations who consider all salaries to be administrative and they don't support administrative costs. There are some agencies that say program salaries, staff that are delivering the program, are a program cost and not an administrative, and we'll pay for those. It just depends on the funding source, but it's very common to see salaries in the grant budget. And in addition to those salaries, it can be a full-time position. It can be part of one person's position. It could be, 40% of this person and 30% of that person based on whatever else they have to do for your organization. It can be an existing person that's going to take up extra duties, or it can be a new hire. So yeah, salaries are allowed usually. As well as salaries, you can include the fringe benefits, the parts that the agency has to pay on people who are hired. So for instance, excuse me, the organization may have to pay workers' comp, unemployment, FICA, some other things on people that they hire. And those are true costs to the organization, so you're allowed to include those. If you give everybody else in your organization health insurance and you're hiring a new person, you should include health insurance in the budget. But you can't just add health insurance to this one if it's not part of the agency's policy to give it to everybody else. So it needs to just be consistent across the board. Fringe benefits could include, depending on what your agency covers, workers' comp, unemployment, Social Security, FICA, and retirement, health insurance. Some other people give life insurance and things like that. So whatever the fringe benefit packages for your other employees is what you would include in the grant based on the percentage of salaries that you're going to pay. So that can be in there. Travel costs. You can pay for mileage reimbursement for staff using their own car. You can include, travel to a conference, including the cost of the conference. That would go under travel. Hotel rooms, airfare or rental car, those kind of things that you need. As long as it's allowable in the grant, those are common budget items. Supplies. Supplies are anything that costs less than $5,000 generally and have a shelf life of 3 years or less. Compared to equipment, which is items that are over $5,000 for a single unit and have a longer shelf life or a longer usage. So generally, a laptop is not equipment. A laptop or a desk computer are supplies. They generally don't last more than 3 years in the same, working order, and they don't cost $5,000 unless it's a specific piece of equipment for research studies. Sometimes those get kind of pricey. But for the most part, I don't know about esports. Are esports computers running up there near 5,000? Probably not. They're probably less than that. You can also include consultants and subawardees. So if you are hiring somebody to do part of the training for you, you're going to hire somebody from the high school or the college to come teach a class. That's a consultant. If you're going to work with another nonprofit as a partner and they're going to handle the therapy part of your recovery program, then they would be a subawardee. So you would get a grant and then you would subaward a piece of that grant to them to carry out one of the objectives. So those are allowable costs. Also, in research on college campuses, I saw this a lot. They would have a piece of equipment, and when it came and it needed to be installed, they needed new electrical outlets moved or things like that. Those are contractor costs. Those would go in the budget too, because it's something that's required to make the project work. Then there's other costs that are called participant costs, and these are things that the excuse me a second. Participant costs are those things that a participant of the program gets to keep. So most commonly you hear tuition, right? You get a scholarship, that's a cost. The tuition goes to the student. Work programs, maybe you have to buy some steel-toed boots for somebody that they need for their job. Those are participant costs that they get to keep. Rent, utilities, things that help that individual that they get to keep, those are participant costs. And the reason that's separated out, because on federal grants, there's certain rules of what can and can't be allowable. So they give them a separate category. So it depends on the grant. Sometimes it'll say no participant costs. Sometimes it'll say that's fine. So that's where we put those. And then there's a category for indirect costs. These don't matter at all unless you're doing federal grants and some state grants. Indirect costs are costs that can't be directly attributed to any one program of the agency. So for instance, the utilities in the building that we're using right now, if I were to charge each agency on this call for a part of these utilities, that would cost more in my time and paperwork than the utilities cost themselves. So the federal government has said, yeah, you don't have to track it down to the penny. We'll give you some flat rates that you can get to cover those kind of costs instead of having to break it out amongst every grant. Other costs may be your audit. Now, there's different ways to do that. Some people do a cost allocation plan and they figure out what that's going to be, and they have numbers that they use in grants, and other opt for the indirect costs. Indirect costs can be negotiated for federal grants. This is a more advanced topic, but you can get a negotiated rate where it says that 30% of any grant dollars you receive are it's about what it costs to cover the overhead. Others will say you can use what's called a de minimis rate. If you've never had an indirect cost rate, you can use the federal de minimis, which means a 10% on federal grants for these overhead type costs, your audits and your your finance staff, maybe people who you can't directly say that they're spending what percentage of their time they're spending on which grant. So that's a more advanced topic, but those are allowable in grants if they're federal, if they are state with federal money passing through to the state. So there's some options for that. But check with your finance office if you have one. If you're a solo person in your business and you want to know more about that, you can just reach out to me. I'll answer questions on that kind of thing or point you in the right direction. That sounds fun. Okay. Anything else in budget categories that you don't see there that you've thought of that you might want to include?
Nikki, we had a few specific questions of things that
Okay.
people want to buy and they don't know what they would fall under.
Okay, great.
So the first one is a chest freezer that would be $500 and it would last more than 3 years. What would this be?
Because of the ticket price, it would be a supply. So that would be okay. Since it's under $5,000, I would go with a supply. Usually, and if you're uncertain about that amount, make your best guess on what you think it should be. I usually go with the dollar amount. And then if the funder says, yeah, we like what you're doing, but we want you to move that money into uh, an equipment, then they'll make that adjustment with you after you get the award. So again, this is our best plan. This is our best guess. So you just want to be as close as you can. So yeah, a $500 chest freezer, I would put under supplies. If you were buying um, something that's bolted into the walls and it's a larger freezer, like in a commercial kitchen, and it was $4,000, I might call that an equipment because it's solid. It's going to stay there for a while, and it's part of the building, really. Um, so, and that's true. That's another thing I hadn't mentioned, construction. If you're doing construction, that's probably under consultants. Some people break out supplies from the consultants if they are in the negotiation that the agency will buy the supplies and the consultant will put them together. Or if you're hiring just like a general contractor to do something, it might all go under consultants, but you need to explain how you're breaking that down. Okay, were there other questions on other ones?
One more quick one.
Okay.
This was, what would gifts given in a camp or a banquet count as? Participation cost. Example, everyone's getting a winter hat at dinner.
Okay. So you are buying everybody a hat for the, if the hat has the agency logo on it, then it's advertising. Some grants will allow that and some won't. If it's for people who can't afford to buy a hat, then it's just a supply and a program. It's a program participant cost. It goes to the client. They get to keep it. Or it's an incentive for participating, which could be a participant cost. So I know in some programs, you can buy gas cards to incentivize people to show up to events. And so, if they show up, then they get a $10 gas card to help reimburse them for their gas, and then they can come to the next meeting. Those are participant costs. So yeah, a hat would be that. Some funders don't want to pay for any advertising at all. So if you have your logo on it, then it may not fly. Of course, they'd have to see it first. So that's at your risk of what your auditor's going to find. But other times you work with I've seen organizations work with a local sponsor to just pay for those hats, and they put their name on it and your name on it. And then that gets it out of the grant realm. So if that's what you mean, then yeah.
Perfect. They both said thank you. That was all the shopping questions we have.
Okay, good. If you think of more later, just drop it into the chat. Let's see. We're running out of time, aren't we? We got about 10 minutes. Okay. Let's see what we got next here. I think we're getting done. Okay. Sometimes grants ask for your budget and they want you to fill that out in like a table and fill out these boxes and tell them what the budget numbers are, make sure the math adds up. And sometimes they want a budget narrative. And that narrative is how you explain how you came up with those numbers. This is where you show your work. Remember in math class, they'd always say, show your work. Show us how you got to that answer. That's what they want to see here. And that might include something such as in language, 50% of the project director's time will be put on the grant, and their base salary is $40,000 a year. So we're asking for $20,000 plus a 30% fringe rate of whatever that math is, $6,000. And then that's our total for that staff and fringe. So just explaining how you did that. Office supplies, program supplies. We're going to buy hats for participants. We can get them at $3 a piece. through a discount and we want to buy 100 of them, so that's $300. Yeah, so this is just where you show your math. How I usually start my budget is nice big round numbers to see if I'm going to be able to do it in the allowable funding amount. Like if the grant says you can't ask for more than $25,000, I'll go through and say, okay, I'm going to spend about $10,000 in this category, about $5,000 in this category, and then $100 here and I kind of guess. And then I go back and check all my numbers. And as I'm checking those numbers, I write out my budget narrative, explaining how I did that. So that's just how I work. Like I said earlier, my best practice is I start with the budget and the how when I'm working on a grant, because that's where my brain starts. That's where I'm at when I say I need a grant. And I start working on that. And then I go into the other pieces to make this the case for it. So, all right. What else we got on the slides or the questions? All right. The how much to continue is a big piece of the plan. Grants want to know, are they expected to fund this year after year after year forever? Or are you going to be able to become self-sufficient? Are you going to be earning money with this program in some way? Do you have other grants? What is out there that what's your plan? So when I'm planning, when I'm doing my 80% planning, I get to this point and I say, okay, I want to hire somebody, but how am I going to keep them on staff after this grant ends? Is it fair to hire somebody and say, yeah, it took me 6 months to hire you and now I got you a job for 6 months and then the grant ends? So you got to think about that. How do you forward that on to the next year? What happens after the end of the grant? Is it something that, well, I'm not going to be able to hire somebody who in the agency can manage that if I pay for part of their salary and then they can go back to what they were doing after the grant's done? Or is it something I can do with a volunteer? How do I, you look at how you're going to sustain it long term and what the plan is. If future funding is needed, where do you think it's going to come from? If you develop a curriculum and you sell it, then you may have program income coming in. If you own a building and you rent out space, then that's income that can help carry this. If you're a college and you collect tuition, then if you increase your enrollment, then your tuition dollars go up and therefore you have a little bit of extra money to sustain this program. Those are easy ones. Most of us don't have that. Most of the time, our answer is we will continue to develop partnerships and seek additional funding resources through donations, gifts, and grants. That's usually what I put because that's honestly what we're going to do. We're going to have to keep looking. But I like to look at it ethically when I'm planning and really see how it's going to impact the people involved in the grant. If it's a kind of gig work where people move from job to job to job anyway, I'm more likely to say, yeah, I can put a temporary hire in here. If you're doing some kind of events and you just need speakers or you need someone who's just going to be planning things for a year and they can go on and plan something else somewhere else, then that doesn't feel bad. But if you're offering somebody a full-time job and you just need to let them know up front that this is a temporary position contingent upon funding, I just feel that's a ethical thing that we should all do as nonprofits. All right, and just planning on what happens next. Sometimes your expenses are sometimes your expenses are a one-time expense. They are, I need to purchase a software package that has a lifetime license. And once I have it, I'll be able to do A, B, and C. So we won't need any more money, right? Or I need to have my roof fixed. And once we have that done, then that doesn't cost anything again, it's done, right? So sometimes that's your answer in your sustainability. This is a one-time infusion of funds. We don't need any more after that. But most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's part of our general operating. We're going to continue to do it. We're going to ask for more money. We may come back to you. We may go to somebody else, but we're going to continue to grant seek and build on our successes to continue to do so. But don't skip the question. If you skip the question, you get 0 points. If you answer it to say, we're going to continue to look for other partners and funding, then you can get the points because you have a plan. They may not like your plan, but at least you have a plan. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Surprisingly, where do these show up? Categories called budget, budget narrative, and sustainability plan. Those are pretty self-explanatory. And at the bottom, again, this goes back to if you're doing a grant and not a cooperative agreement, you define how much things are going to cost. You get to say, our agency pays this much per hour. Our agency gives this much in mileage reimbursement. If you don't have a mileage rate, you can use there's a federal website that tells you what the federal rate is that you could turn in on your taxes if you were doing it. There's different rates for different things, but you define that. And this is where you can be a little bit in control. Now, the funder can say, I love your project, I love your idea, but we're not going to give you that much money. We'll give you this much. And if that happens, then you say, okay, wonderful. You just make sure that you're strong enough to say to them, let me look at the scope of work and see what I have to cut out. Because you can negotiate. You don't have to accept the lower money and still be expected to carry out all the same tasks you said you would do when they've cut the budget. That's the time to negotiate and talk about it and ask questions. If you've just lost $500 out of a $50,000 grant, you can probably still make it work. But if they cut you by a significant portion, negotiate with them on what can come and go. They expect that. Okay. What we got next on the slides? I think we're going to talk about other things. Yes. So in addition to the project narrative, which we just talked about, I've got 2 slides here, which I'm going to go through really quick. And then these resources are out there. If you do end up coming to a 2-day workshop, we have samples and you can learn more about this. Every grant asks for some kind of abstract or executive summary, and that's the last thing you write, but you have to remember it's the first thing the reviewer is going to read. So don't wait till the absolute last second to write it, because that's the impression you're giving the reader, is that first thing they read is the last thing you write. So make sure that you take the time and give yourself time to explain what your summary is. And why do I say you write it last? Because you already know what your project's about. You know the answers that you don't have if it's the first thing you write. You've already thought through the planning, you've already written things out, and you know what you're talking about, and then you can just summarize it here. Less is more, and a lot of times this is the piece that funders will use in their press releases. When you get the grant, this is what they're going to put out there. See, spelling counts, grammar counts. Take time to make sure this is right. I did one once and misspelled West Virginia right in the middle of it. I mean, come on. And so that was on my award letter. That was in the press release they put in the newspaper. That was on the press release that stayed on their website for 10 years that I couldn't spell West Virginia. So anyway, just be aware of that. And you need to be specific for each proposal. This isn't something that you can cut and paste to the next one. It's just like writing a cover letter for your resume. It needs to be specific to the job, and this needs to be specific to the grant. Okay, next page, real quick, is attachments. This is a list of some of the most common attachments grants will ask for. They often want to see if nonprofits are the eligibility, they want to see a proof of your 501c3, your IRS letter. That's not your W-9. Your W-9 is separate. This is your IRS letter. Sometimes they also want a W-9, which is just it has your code in it and things, but they want that differently. List of who's on your board. Sometimes they'll ask for audits or a copy of your 990 that the nonprofit has filed. If you have enough revenue, you're required to do those things. They sometimes want to see resumes of the key staff involved, and job descriptions for any new positions you're proposing. An organizational budget. I can't stress enough, this is key. Every organization should have a budget. I see a lot of startups that just have no idea and they don't have a budget, but yet they're trying to apply for a $10 million grant. There's no way you're going to get it unless you can show that you have a plan on how your income and your revenue and your expenses are working. If you have an annual report of some kind, you can include that. There's a difference between a letter of support and a letter of commitment. A letter of commitment is that someone agrees to do something as part of this project, and a letter of support is, I like your organization. So when the guidelines say a letter of commitment, don't send a whole bunch of letter that says, we've worked with them for 10 years and we think they're great. They don't want that. They want to know, I'm going to provide after school support for this program Monday through Friday till 5 p.m. That's the commitment. Or we're going to contribute staff time to being part of this planning committee. And so we will actually sit on the committee and help plan this project or provide oversight. No, be specific in your commitments. Okay, I think that's my last slide. Is that correct, Dana? And I just have questions? I think so. Yep. All right. So if we have any other questions, I know we're running out of time and I understand people's time is valuable. So if you need to go, you can go, but if I'll stick around for a little while, if that's okay with Dana, and answer any questions that people may have. Yes, thank you all. And I saw someone send me a message that they know my parents. I'll talk to you later.
All right, Nikki, you're getting lots of nice thank yous in the chat box, so be sure to check it. And if anyone has
Great.
a question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box and I'll read it for you. Ooh.
All right, sounds good. So if there's nobody having any questions, I'm just looking here at the wide variety of people who are here and the organizations that were in earlier. I was looking back at some of those. It's a good group. I will just tell you a little bit about my company. I am a nonprofit consultant. So if there are issues that you would like to have some help with, please reach out to me. My email's in this, and when you get this, it's on the last slide, I think, and it's in the materials. You can reach out to me and we can talk about what resources are available. Other than that, have confidence in yourself. You can do the grant writing. You can figure it out. Just answer these questions. Plan before you write, and it makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. I think you might get two questions, Nikki. Natalie's typing one out, but in the meantime,
Okay.
Christy had a question. She wanted to know if you have any suggestions on where to begin to look for grants that will fund a high school program that places students in internship positions.
Oh, wonderful. I would look at, depending on where you're located and depending on if you have corporate headquarters in your area or a lot of a particular type of industry, I'd start with them and see if they have a foundation, and see if they're willing to sponsor that kind of activity. Then I would also look at the Department of Labor and Department of Education, because I think they both have opportunities for that could support high schools and training. There's all kinds of different categories within that, depending on who the student is. Are they traditional students, non-traditional students, low income, justice involved youth? There's different programs out there for different groups. So yeah. And workforce on the job training. Yes, absolutely. And in the state of West Virginia, there is a program that just passed with the community and technical colleges that they can provide dual enrollment credit at no charge to the student. So they don't have to pay tuition now. They can get that through their schools and the community technical colleges. And then they also have the West Virginia Invest Scholarship, where if you don't have a community college, don't have a college degree, you can attend community technical colleges for free in most cases. And there's also learn and earn programs through the CTC. So you might check with them and see what's available already that they may have a grant that they could pass down and tie your school into. That's another option.
Awesome. Okay. I think we have a few more here. Let's see, they got jumbled up. Okay. Natalie has a question. We got our 501c3 in February. Congratulations.
Great.
A few weeks later, I saw that nonprofits could apply for federal appropriations money. We were earmarked as a $10,000 grant. I'm not sure when we will actually get that. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, those discretionary spending accounts, those are ones that they used to be called earmarks back in the day, and then they kind of outlawed earmarks, and then they came back and said, okay, senators and representatives can put money in the budget for projects back at home. So there are I assume this is what you're talking about, and you could apply through a portal through like Manchin's office or Shelley Capito's office, and you go into a competitive pool, and then they decide which projects they want to fund. So that's amazing. If you got one of those so quickly after getting started up, that's really good. That's good news. And that money should help you get started.
Can she use that money toward a fundraiser that normally a restriction? Natalie, I'm not sure. Do you got
It
that one, Nikki?
depends. Yeah, it depends on when you get the award, you will have to deal with whatever agency they ran that money through. Remember when I talked at the beginning, all the congressional money goes through different agencies. So if it's through Department of Health and Human Services or through Department of Education, there'll be rules on what you can and can't do. I would refer back to whatever you put in your budget in the proposal. That's your contract with them. That's where I would start. If it was in the budget, yeah, you can spend it. If it's not in the budget, then I would say no. But then look at the guidelines when you get it. They should spell out what's allowable and what's not. And they might even make you sit through a class to to know how you can and can't spend the money. So I would just wait till you get the award. Those take, like I said, it takes forever for those things to shake down. And we have the budgets right now is not approved. So it just depends on when they get that all sorted out in DC.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikki. We have a few more. Someone asked about how you all will receive the recording of this webinar. I'll email it to you later today with the slides. So be on the lookout for that. It'll go to the email address that you registered this webinar for. So you'll get it. And then Janet had a really great question, Nikki. She said, what is an estimate of the amount of time it takes to plan and write a grant proposal?
Oh, it depends. For a foundation proposal for a smaller amount of money, you know, if to me, a smaller amount of money is 10 to 25,000, because a lot of foundations give money in that range, five to 20. Those usually take if you've done the planning part, if you know what you want to do and you can answer some of these questions, um, then the actual writing piece could be anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of time, and that can be spread out over several days. But if you are talking about the planning itself, it just depends on the scope of your project. It could be something that you sit down in an afternoon with a team and you get everything planned out in a couple hours and you're ready to go. And in other places, I've worked on a grant where we planned and had meetings and coordinated for 8 months. So it just depends on the scope of the project.
Okay, we have two more questions. I have a really good
Mhm.
question for the end. I mean, they're all good questions, but I have
Okay.
one really cool question. You all want to stick around for this one. Okay, so Rita wanted to know, would you apply for a grant for a specific event with the grant review date outside of the event date, or would you need to submit it within the time frame both the event and the grant review deadline are in the same time frame?
Okay. If the event is after the deadline and anticipated award date, then yes, I would apply. If the event happened before and you're asking for reimbursement, or it will happen before the money comes in on award, they may not pay for it. So I wouldn't do that. I would wait till the next cycle, and either reschedule the event or do another grant, look for another grant to fit that.
All right, and here's your last question. This is a cool one,
Okay.
Nikki. This is from Randy. What one thing do you attribute to your 70% success rate within writing grants? You should be in the Grant Writers Hall of Fame.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's being selective in what I apply for. I really try and do that matching work up front, and I spend the time where I think I'm going to get the most reward. I really think that that is it. And also, I answer these questions for everything I do, and I answer every question. I don't, and if I can't answer the questions, I'm not ready for the grant, and I'll just keep planning until I'm ready, and then I'll go after the grant. So I think that is one of the things that I think makes a difference between a really good proposal and one that's not so good. But then sometimes I have had grants where, you know, we've mailed them out or sent it out to the federal government, and they send you comments back after they do the review. If you don't get the grant, you get the reviewer's comments, and they tell you what were your strengths and what were your weaknesses. And I've had 2 grants come back in the last 2 years that had no weaknesses, had lots of strengths, but we still didn't get the grant. So it was just so competitive. We just didn't rise to the top of those that scored well. So it's out of your control. You can't always control what the reviewers are going to do. But I do think that I took the time to be a reviewer. That's another big tip I would give you. If you get the chance to sit and be a reviewer for a grant proposal, it helps you understand what people look for when they read your grants and the type of competition that they look at and what rises to the top and what doesn't. I think that's a good tip to really help see how it works. And yes, I saw your comment there. Yeah. Volunteer to be a grant reviewer. Absolutely. And then you want to always read the guidelines front and back and again. And then I always read the guidelines again right before I submit to make sure I didn't miss anything. So those are some of the tips, my pro tips I use on a day-to-day basis. I think that's about it.
That's a great tip. Sometimes I think you're so excited to get the money, you see what you want to see. So like Nicki
Yeah.
said, you have to read it a few times to make sure that it's actually a good fit. It's like a matchmaking service. That's what we experience here at Volunteer West
Yeah.
Virginia. Nicki, do you have something to share about that?
No, I agree with that 100%. I've done it. I've gotten so excited and I started working on a project and and then I go back and look at the guidelines and I'm like, oh yeah, this one's in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I didn't read it. I got too excited about the potential and I didn't read through it. And also my project may not be quite as good of a fit as I thought when I first read it. I always look in the guidelines, there will always be the purpose of this funding is. And if you can substitute your project into that sentence that you're doing exactly what they say their purpose is, then go for it. If it's almost there, then look at it closer and see if it's a good fit. If you have to really wring it and twist it and make it fit, it's not the right grant. Because the reviewers know that. They can read through that stuff. And don't use words like always and never and use data. Use, we don't want to say that, our program's the best in the country. Based on what? Based on who? Who says that? Where's it from? Or we have the, we have the only program that does this. How far? In your building? You're the only program in your building that does this. You're the only program in your city that does this. You're the only program in the state that does this. And how do you know that? I mean, just be careful with those kind of, is that a superlative? What's the word? When you use the really big, vague, yeah, that don't do those. Funders want to know why, and they want to know the details. So those are my tips. Keep it simple. When you're writing, answer, yeah, absolute words. I see that. Yeah. When you're writing, answer what they ask for, not more. Don't give them too much. When you're working on a recipe and it calls for a pinch of salt, adding a cup doesn't make it taste better. Same thing with grant writing. Just answer what they ask for. And keep it simple. Okay. If there's no further questions, you'll get a copy of the slides. My email is on the back page, and my website is thegrantadvantage.net. It's .net, not .com. My email is just Nicki@thegrantadvantage.net, so feel free. If you have a follow-up question to this proposal or this presentation, it doesn't cost anything to call me and ask me a question. I'm not going to send you a bill. Feel free just to reach out and say, hey, I didn't understand this, or 3 months from now you're working on a grant and you go, what did she mean by how? Just shoot me an email and I can answer that question and help you out.
Thanks, Nicki.
Okay.
That's a great gift for all you that stayed on till the end. You got a special gift from Nicki for your future self.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you all very much.
You're welcome. And thanks, Nicki. You did a wonderful job. And we really
Oh,
appreciate all of you. And we'll see you next month for our final webinar of the year. Be sure to sign up. We're going to do some holiday networking. So thank you all. And thank you, Nicki. It was wonderful. A plus.
yeah. Appreciate it.
All right.
We'll see you all later.
See y'all later.